We're getting to a really exciting part of the underside restoration now, as new paints and sealers are soon to be applied to the underside to give it its better, fresh and more protective finish. So all the corrosion and fabrication work has been completed over the last couple of weeks. Lots of individual small corrosion removal processes that we've gone through on the previous video updates, and now that the reinforcement work is done as well. So we've got the Reedish V3 reinforcement plates, left front, right rear, and the left rear as well, along with the two spacer plates, and then obviously the Reedish brackets as well for the fuel tank straps there, the brake pipes, and then the other fuel tank strap there and there. And then there's the other two on the other side as well. Rear trailing arm pockets are in as well. So they're plugged weld, stitch welded, and they've already had a slight seam sealer approach round the sides just to help build up and make sure that the seamed edges were protected before we go and spray the seam sealer into that area as well. So it's lots of new brackets, and as you can remember back to the areas that were corroded in here, all that's been removed. Like I say, they've already had an etch primer over the underside, bare metal areas, and then a brushed in seam sealer effect on some of those areas where we've had to remove significant amounts of original BMW seam sealer. And the reason why we do that is basically just to build the thickness back up. So some of the original seam sealer is so thick that when you remove some of it and then spray up into an area close to it, you will see a rise or a change when it goes from bare metal to seam over BMW seam sealer. So in certain areas, and especially where we've done any bracket changes, we will always do a brush system first, just to try and give it some bulk, and therefore the levels won't be too dissimilar once it's painted or sealed, because at the end of the day we want to make it look as original as possible once it's finished. So just looking around from the back now, and you can see with certain torches, it gives you an idea if there's areas there that needs a little bit more primer. And we're just looking at the backs of the handbrake consoles and the new brackets to show there's absolutely no corrosion anywhere. The rear turrets, the joined in effect here where we've done the stitch welding all through the rear axle carrier panel to the wheel arch panel process. And if we actually step back, you can see now how much of the vehicle has to be obviously masked, just as if it was being painted an external paint at a body shop where the underside would probably be protected. Now, ours is obviously the opposite way, because we have to protect all of the over the top of the vehicle and the lifts and things, because we're painting the underneath of the vehicle. So we've got jacking pads areas, rear seal sections, going down the seals, which are all in great order. You can see the underside of the panel of the stamped presses here, and the floor pan is still so noticeable. Now we've got the light on, so you can see the shadow and the highlight. So that shows you how good the underside of the metal is. There were just certain areas that were just suffering with some localized corrosion that obviously needed to be attended to. We never paint the inside of the arches. If you're wondering why that's not got any primer on it, well, that's a quality control process, just to make sure that the initial batch of top coat colouring, which goes on top of the seam sealer, is in fact the original, as close as original to the BMW E-coat. That's why we leave a strip of it there, and that just gives us chance to always keep on checking our quality of our colour mixes, for example, because this car is going to the E-coat finish, the original underside, which is that sort of yellowy olive green sort of hue to it. So going into the right hand side arch, similar sort of effect, where obviously the arches are masked, the battery box section's masked, all down the sides of the vehicles are masked, and the lifting platforms. The jacking pads are out, so we've got the most amount of contact of paint underneath. And then going down the right hand side as well, we can see that in this case we've finished our work with the corrosion removal on that chassis leg, for example. And once that is seam sealed, nothing is going to be able to get in there. And once we've done our internal cavity wax from the ends and all the holes where it spreads out through these fluted sort of castellations, then there's going to be full protection, and we're never going to see anything growing in that region again. Now, if we stand back and look at the central section, you can see now the tunnel heat insulation, sound insulation has just been unbolted and kept in position on the gearbox, but just pinched together and taped to bring itself so that we can get the paint around the back, so that when we put that sound insulation back on, you've got a nice solid contrast from the underside colour to then the black sound insulation. The gearbox special tool is there, holding the gearbox in position and therefore the engine in situ as well. And then when we go forward, we can see all the engine is fully protected, masked up. They've done a lot of masking on this car, hours and hours worth of it, intricate masking around the front sections to make sure that there are no problems. And then we get a very good blend. So going out into the left front arch, if we're standing in the left front corner looking towards the car, got obviously the bumper, continuation of the protection and the masking, and then that gearbox section going in through to the engine to the front bumper area just leaves us with the internal front area. So we've got the wheel arch area, the turrets, the chassis legs, all these things that had to be, if we think back to weeks ago when it came in, when it was very heavily dirty around these areas, lots of additional non-genuine wax that all had to be scrubbed off. And it's come a long way. The corrosion removal on certain of the brackets, on the brake pipes and around the inner sections, around the these items here, which are the anti-roll bar brackets, for example. Our special tool there allows us to get to most of these areas with where the subframe previously that used to fit there would never allow you to get access to. And we're going to be going right out into the arches, including these box sections here. Even though that's all protected and hidden behind the wheel arch liners, it still needs to be taken care of. Right up into the engine bay. So the exhaust manifolds are off this car because they are being coated, ceramic coated. So that's given us even more access to be able to make our continue areas here that wouldn't normally be able to get access for cars or customers that don't want the exhaust systems carried out or the manifolds taken off. You can't get to this area, but because all the manifolds are out of the way, you can go all the way through the chassis leg area and get some really good coverage up into those areas. So when you are viewing the car fully painted and reassembled from the underside, it's hard to tell where the paint finishes, and that's the idea of it. We want to be able to hide the paint lines as best as possible, much like a body shop painter would be doing if they were trying to blend in something on the outside of the wing, for example. You'd want to hide the paint lines because you don't really want anybody to see where you start and stop. So that's why this is part of the heat insulation for the bulkhead as well. It's been unbolted and just pulled back and taped out of the way so that we can get the paint behind there. So when that goes up against it, it's going to be a great contrast, for example. And then finally out into the right hand side wheel arch, very similar to the left hand side, nothing much different, all protected, and corrosion removal neutralized and painted in etch primer first and then a high build primer. So that's the full underside of the car protected from the rear, the center and the front. This is what constitutes to a full underside restoration in our opinion. Underside restoration, I will emphasize, it's not outer body paint. We're not a body shop, we don't deal with the outer paint, but we certainly do take care of all of the underside as much as possible. So next stage is moving on to the sprayable seam sealer process.